Okay, I have 6:30, so we'll go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everyone to this virtual program from Mid-Continent Public Library in Independence, Missouri. I am Angie Mack, and I work in the Reader Engagement Department, and we are very happy to have Mark Lyons with us for our program on organic gardening tonight. So I'm going to go through a couple quick housekeeping reminders and then some um, reminders about upcoming virtual programs, and then I'll turn it over to Mark. So as a way of housekeeping reminders, I want to remind you to keep yourselves muted throughout tonight's program. That's going to help us hear Mark better and give everyone an opportunity to not miss anything, to catch everything. So keep yourself muted. And with that said, go ahead and put any questions you might have in the chat box. That way we can get to your questions. You can jot them down there so you don't forget them as we go throughout the program, and we'll get to as many as we can before at the end of tonight's program. So tonight's program is being recorded. It will be posted to our YouTube channel in a couple of a day or two, and then it'll be available for 2 weeks to rewatch if you need to. Excuse me. So let's see. Also, I'm in the chat box. I will be placing a link to an online evaluation. That evaluation helps us let us know how we did tonight, what we did well, and how we might have missed the mark, so we can make sure that we correct it for next time. So go ahead and put. I'll put the link there. Fill it out for me if you can. I will also be sending a follow-up email tomorrow or the next day, as soon as the video recording is available on YouTube. And in that email, we'll have, among other things, a link to that evaluation form. All right, so with all of that, I'm going to go through a couple of quick reminders about upcoming virtual programs. You should see some slides on your screen. The QR code is linked to the registration. Also put that registration links to these programs in the email that I send out following tonight's program. So like I said, either tomorrow or the next day. So first of all, we have garden to table dishes. Summer cooking is fresh, light, and sunny as the season. With produce overflowing, there are many ways to make delicious everyday meals. So in this program, you'll learn to make dishes that will have you lingering over the dinner table. This program is going to be with Vanessa Young, and it is virtual only. So through via Zoom, June 10th at 7 p.m. Central Time. Our next one we have, as we are learning about gardening, with gardening comes garden pests. So 3 principles of natural pest control. We're going to have this program several times throughout throughout the month of June, and then also August 11th. The August 11th program is going to be hybrid, both at our Colburn Road Library Center and Zoom. So the registration link for any of those programs is there on the screen. And again, I will add it to the email. If you are growing organic, delicious food, chances are bugs will be drawn to it too. Gardener Miriam Tata will join us for this program, and we'll discover eco-friendly methods to protect your garden bounty without harmful chemicals. So 3 principles of natural pest control. Also coming up, another gardening program. Maybe you can take some things that you learned tonight and apply it and learn a few more things about raised bed gardening. We have this program coming up, it looks like 6 times. This is an in-person only, so this does not have a virtual option. In-person only throughout the month of June at several of our branches there. Raised bed gardens are both functional and attractive. Learn how to construct, fill, garden in raised beds with the University of Missouri Extension. Topics include construction material selection, soil mixes, water management, and more. So throughout the month of June, raised bed gardening in-person program. Cool outdoor adventures. Maybe you need to take a break from your garden. I don't know. That might be a thing. So in Missouri, you don't have to stay inside when it gets hot. Join outdoor writer Brent Frazee for some cool ways to enjoy the outdoors. He'll lead you on a tour of some cool spots, including hiking to the Devil's Icebox in Rockbridge State Park, floating on the Current River, and swimming at Johnson's Shut-in State Park. These programs are in person throughout the month of June, and also a hybrid option, June 17th at 6:30 at both our North Independence branch and via Zoom. Finally, we have Missouri's native edible plants. This is another option that's in person only, June 24th, 25th, and 26th. Summer is a season for bountiful wild edibles. Join Ruth Van Dam Hines as she shares some guidelines for safe, ethical, and legal foraging and identifying harvesting of wild plants from dandelions to wild grape leaves. She'll introduce preparation recipes and like wild mushroom crackers, salads, and teas. So Missouri's native edible plants, June 24th, 25th, and 26th in person at three of our mid-continent branches. So we are excited about offering those programs, and we hope you can join us. All right, I am going to stop sharing and introduce tonight's speaker. So we are happy to have Mark Lyons here with us. He's also known as the Garden Troubadour, and he's a master gardener, consultant, and educator. He's been gardening since he was 10 years old, and his first success came when he grew a foot-long, 2.5-pound cucumber and was featured in the local paper. Today, Mark runs a successful business called Green Thumb at Your Service, dedicated to inspiring and coaching people on growing their own food. He's based in Palatine, Illinois, and travels across the country to deliver these presentations on vegetables and mushroom gardening, harvest preservation, and home cheese making. He's an accomplished singer and songwriter and performer in his spare time when he's not gardening or dreaming about gardening. He plays the guitar, ukulele, and the washboard. Thank you so much, Mark, for joining us.
You are very welcome. It's great to be back, even if only virtually, at the Mid-Continent Public Library. So, I'd like to welcome everybody to our presentation tonight, all about organic power gardening. Give me a moment to share my screen here. And oops, got rid of the wrong one. Oh, no, I didn't. Got rid of both of them. Here we go. That's what I wanted. There we go. Hopefully everybody can see that. All right, Angie already told you a little bit about me, so we'll skip that part. Today, what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about planting the organic garden, how to prepare it, planting it, a little bit about germination and growth of the seeds and seedlings you planted, flowering and fruit set, talk about attracting pollinators, soil fertility and plant nutrition, and talk a little bit about mulch. And if we have some time left, we'll talk about weed, pest, disease, and animal control. So, first thing is, what exactly is organic gardening? We hear a lot about it, but what does it exactly mean when we say we want to garden organically? When you garden organically, you're essentially working to create a sustainable and balanced ecosystem in your garden that starts in the soil and includes the water supply, people, wildlife, and even insects. Excuse me. An organic gardener strives to work in harmony with natural systems and to minimize and continually replenish any resources that the garden consumes. So as you can see from the picture I have there, it essentially means no harsh chemicals, no non-sustainable practices. Basically, once again, you are working in harmony with nature. So that's the raw definition. Now let's talk about planting the garden. Just a few preliminaries, and this goes for any type of garden that you want to plant. If you've never gardened at all, then don't start getting delusions of grandeur that you're going to turn your backyard into a giant organic food oasis, because if it doesn't quite work out, you'll have spent a lot of time and a lot of money. You'll be too discouraged and you won't want to try again. On the other hand, if you start small with a simple raised bed or a container on your patio or even a grow bag, and it doesn't work out, well, you'll still be inclined to try again because you haven't spent a lot of money, time, and effort. And on the other hand, if it's successful, you'll be encouraged maybe to expand a little next time. it goes without saying, but plant only the vegetables that you like to eat. Now, no offense to those of you that like them, but Brussels sprouts are not my favorite vegetable. Therefore, you will not find them in my garden because I don't like them. You will find tomatoes and carrots and other things, but you will not find Brussels sprouts. One of my cardinal rules of gardening is never stick anything in the ground if you don't know anything about it. You know, gardening is a fun hobby, but if you want to be successful, you have to do a little bit of homework. You have to ask yourself before you stick something in the ground, how is this going to grow? Is it going to spread? Is it going to take over? Is this a native plant that will help the native flora and fauna? Or is this some exotic, which is not going to be good to anybody, but just for bragging rights for myself? So these are things you want to keep in mind before you put anything in the ground. Now, successful in-ground gardens require an abundance of sunshine, 6 to 8 hours per day. If you're growing fruiting crops like tomatoes and cucumbers and all that, you want to make sure that you have at least that 8 hours of sun, more towards the 8 side of the equation, because it takes a lot more energy from the sun for those plants to produce a fruit. And once again, if we're talking in-ground garden, you'll need plenty of space. You know, don't plant it where it's going to be shaded by trees and shrubs. Also remember that trees and shrubs are also growing entities, and they're going to compete with your garden for the nutrients and the water that you're supplying. If you don't have the space that you need for an in-ground backyard or front yard garden, then maybe consider a raised bed or a container garden. And lastly, you want to plant near an abundant supply of water. Now, in your backyard or so, if you're near a spigot and you have a good-sized hose, this is ideal. If you don't, you're going to be running back and forth with your watering can, and that's going to get old real fast. So consider that before you situate the garden. Some different kinds of gardens that you can do organically or otherwise. We're all familiar with the typical backyard garden, but nowadays people are taking their lawns in the front, which consume a lot of resources. And if they want to be organic homeowners, you know, work in harmony with the environment, they turn their front yard into something useful instead of just grass, which doesn't really do anything for you. They're turning into something that either is a vegetable garden or a flower garden with native plants, again, working in harmony with nature. There's mini gardens. Container gardens are great. You can do a lot in containers. Raised bed gardening is another way to organically grow. And if you lack the horizontal space in your yard, why not grow vertically? Again, this is another way of growing organically that you're not using a lot of resources, a lot of natural resources. All right, let's talk about preparing the organic garden. First thing you want to consider is when to plant. This is the latest and greatest version of the USDA hardiness zone map. This divides the country into different zones based on the average annual low temperature. So what this means for you as a gardener, you want to be sure that you are growing things that are commensurate with your zone. Don't try to grow something that may look nice or seem beautiful in one area of the country and try to take it back to your home area. And this is just going to waste a lot of resources and is not very organic. Now, in your area, you are in zone, I guess you'd be in zone 6A. So you want to be sure that you are growing things that are commensurate with zone 6A. Now, if you're buying from a local nursery, this shouldn't be an issue because a local nursery is only going to grow but is only going to sell what grows in their area. They wouldn't be in business too long if they didn't. Where people get in trouble, let's say you take a nice trip down to Florida and you find a particular flower or vegetable that you just think is the greatest thing since sliced bread and you just have to have it in your garden. Well, you take it home, you plant it, and you get a few mildly cold days and the plant dies. And you ask yourself, my God, what did I do wrong? Well, what you did wrong is you took something where the average annual low is maybe no more than 55, 60, You took it where the average annual low can be as low as -5 or -10. And I don't know about you, but if you took me from an area where it was the average annual low was 55 to 60, if you put me where the average annual low was -10, I'd wither and die too. So if you want to garden organically, once again, working with nature means planting what will thrive in your region. When thinking about the right time to plant, there's the distinction between cool and warm season crops. And some of this will be in the handouts that Angie will send out later. But part of organic gardening, once again, working in harmony with nature, is planting with the season. So cool season crops can withstand light frosts. They're a little smaller in size. They have a shallower root system. Whereas a warm season crop, if you try to plant it early in the year, you get a light frost that will kill it. So just another way of working in harmony with nature. These are the average annual first and last frost dates for your state. So if you live, say, in the Independence area, your average annual last frost occurs around April 16th. So what this means for you as a gardener is if you're starting from seed, a seed packet may say something like, start your seeds indoors 5 or 6 weeks before the average annual last frost date. So you simply just count back 5 or 6 weeks from April 16th, and that's when you want to start your seeds. In the fall, in your area, the average annual first frost occurs around maybe a week or so before Halloween. So anything that you want to plant, any kind of fall crops you want to plant, you want to make sure to start those in the ground like around July or August so that you'll have a harvest before the frost destroys it. In talking about the right kinds of vegetables to plant at the right time, these are known as very hardy vegetables. These you can plant in the early spring, about 4 to 6 weeks before the average date of the last frost. Now, these particular crops don't do too well in warm weather. So you want to plant them in the early spring when the weather is cool, and then you want to harvest them as the weather starts to get warmer. Similarly, these are known as frost-tolerant vegetables. These you want to plant about 2 to 3 weeks before the average date of the last frost. These are fairly hardy against frost, not as hardy as these vegetables. So once again, you want to plant these at the right time. Tender vegetables, these you do not want to plant too early because a little bit of frost will kill them. So you want to plant them around the average date of the last frost. These vegetables you definitely do not want to plant too early because a light frost will be the end of them. So these plants will germinate only when the soil is warm. So if you're not sure about that your soil is the right temperature, you can buy a soil thermometer and measure the temperature. It's basically all about soil temperature, not necessarily air temperature. And these vegetables are known as medium heat tolerant. These are good for planting in the summertime. You want to plant these about 1 to 2 weeks after the average date of the last frost in spring. In considering growing organically, you want to be sure that you're maximizing the use of the space that you have. You don't want to crowd your vegetables. At the same time, you don't want to plant so few that you have a lot of empty space, which is doing nothing. So in the handouts that you'll be receiving, there'll be some guidelines as to how much an average 100-foot row will produce. So if your garden is less than 100 feet, just do the math. So for example, if you want to plant broccoli, an average 100-foot row will give you about 70 heads. If you have only a 50-foot row, then figure that the broccoli you plant, you're only going to get about 35 heads on average. Again, these are average figures, not necessarily written in stone. All right, where do you want to locate your organic garden? Again, you want to stick it in a place where you're going to get at least 6 to 8 hours of sun per day. That's what your vegetables need in order to successfully grow. And again, if you're growing leafy crops, you can get away with the 6. Fruiting crops, you'll need at least 8 hours. Now, where are you going to find all this sun? Ideal place is on the south side of your house. So again, working in harmony with nature, planting on the south side of your dwelling will give you the most amount of sun. If you can't plant on the south side, And the next best place is the east or the west side. Don't try to plant on the north side. You will not get anything. If you're starting a new garden, you want to first measure and stake out the site using stakes, a tape measure and string. You want to remove the existing grass. Now, the organic way to do it is to either dig it out with a shovel or a spade. You can rototill it. You can also smother it with wet newspaper and black plastic. Notice what I have an X through here, herbicide. Herbicide is not very organic. We're talking things like Roundup or other of their ilk. Herbicide is non-specific. It's going to kill anything green. And most herbicides are really more made for commercial farmers, not necessarily for organic gardeners. And also you have to be careful because if you spray it and you get a good stiff wind, it can blow that herbicide on something you want to keep, like your prize roses, or worse yet, your next door neighbor's prize roses. This is not the way to develop good neighborly relations. You want to test your soil to see what you've got starting at a baseline. You want to make sure that your soils have sufficient amounts of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potash, potassium, in order to support plant growth. You also want to make sure that the pH, the potential hydrogen, which measures acidity or alkalinity of a substance, that this is right for your garden. Garden vegetables perform best when the soils have a slightly acid pH, like 6.5 to 7. If you want to grow blueberries, you need an even more acidic pH, like 4 or 5. Next, you want to add whatever amendments you want to improve the condition of the soil. After that, you want to lay down some mulch. We'll talk a little bit more about mulch later. Let's talk about planting. Starting with seeds, the basic unit of growth. Now, if you want to grow organically, you want to make sure to choose the right seeds. You want to buy your seeds from purveyors who have signed what's known as the Seed Integrity Pledge or the Safe Seed Pledge. Vendors who have signed the Safe Seed Pledge, these are just a partial list of these vendors. You'll be getting that in your handout. But if you want to be sure that the seeds that you plant are organic, these are some of the vendors that you want to purchase from. Seeds are classified in 3 ways: by kind, cultivar, and strain. Now, when you're buying seeds, you want to be sure that your seeds are clean and disease-free. Now, some diseases, like black rot of cabbage, can attach to the seed coat. Others, like blackleg, can be carried inside the seed of plants like cabbage and cauliflower. Some seeds have the seed coats, they're coated with fungicides, like corn, cucumbers, and melons. These can harm the germinating plants. So kind of seed is basically, it's a carrot seed, it's a tomato seed, it's a potato tuber. Cultivar is where things get interesting because a cultivar is basically a different variety of the same kind. And I have an example right here. If your soil is blessed with being nice and loose and light, which is what you want, you can grow a longer rooted variety. However, if your soil is hard, blocky, has a fair amount of clay, you don't want to grow a long rooted variety of carrot because it will come out forked and misshapen. So once again, if you're working in harmony with nature, you want to grow a carrot that doesn't have to push through some of that hard soil. A carrot like the Thumbelina, or another good short-rooted variety would be the oxheart carrot. If, on the other hand, you have nice, loose, light soil, you can grow a longer-rooted variety. Why not do something a little bit different instead of the same old orange carrot? Oh, boring. Why not try a purple carrot like the purple dragon? If you're talking about growing organically and trying to grow foods that will keep you healthy, vegetables and fruits that have a lot of different colors contain a lot of things like the chlorophylls and the anthocyanin and other pigments, which are very good for our bodies. So think outside the orange in terms of carrots, or if you're talking tomatoes, think outside the red. The seed packet will give you lots of good information. Here's an example of something I was talking about earlier. Here we see the kind of seed this is. This is a tomato seed. The cultivar, this is an Anise Noir. This is an interesting cultivar. It almost has a slight pineapple-like flavor, and it's very colorful. And you'll notice, once again, that this is from one of the vendors that have signed the Seed Integrity Pledge, Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds. The back of this particular seed packet contains a lot of good information that will help you when you decide to plant. You've seen the pesticide commercials where they say read and follow label directions. That also applies to your seed packets. You can see on this one that this tells you that it's going to sprout in 7 to 14 days. The ideal temperature for planting your seeds. So you don't want to plant them too soon because if it's too cold, they won't germinate. How deep to plant the seeds, etc., etc. Here's another example. You will notice that this particular type of corn, this is a flour type corn, it has the USDA organic label on it. So you can be reasonably certain that this has not been grown in a lab, it's genetically engineered or anything like that. Once again, good information to help you plant. One thing to keep in mind, many of our garden vegetables are pollinated by the wind or insect pollinated, and many of them we think are different, but they're in the same family and they'll cross-pollinate with each other. For example, if you're trying to grow sweet corn and you live near a commercial farm where they're growing field corn, the pollen from that field corn may blow over on your sweet corn. And when you take a bite out of it, you may find that it's not so sweet. Similarly, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, kale, mustard, etc. We make the distinction. We think they're different, but they are really all the same plant, and they will cross-pollinate with each other. And if you're saving the seeds, which is a good organic thing to do, what you get the following year may look and taste pretty strange. So if you're going to grow these particular brassicas, you want to be sure to isolate them from one another so that they do not cross-pollinate. And here's another example. For your seeds to grow, 4 things you must have. You must have good air circulation, you must have good moisture, you must have plenty of heat, and once again, sunlight. This is a table showing the minimum, optimum, and maximum temperatures in which your seeds will generate. So for example, if you want to plant broccoli seeds, the minimum temperature at which they will germinate is 40 degrees. So once again, working with nature, you don't want to plant them too early in the season because if the soil will be too cold and they won't germinate, or if they do germinate, they'll be stressed and prime candidates for disease or fungal infection. The optimum temperature for broccoli to germinate is the soil temperature has to be about 85 degrees or 29.4 degrees Celsius. That's the best temperature for your broccoli seeds to germinate. If the soil temperature is 95, that's about as high as it can get. If it gets any higher than that, your broccoli seeds will not germinate. When it comes to water, obviously, vegetable seeds have to have water in order to germinate. Seeds tend to germinate faster at higher moisture levels than they do at lower moisture levels. Talk about growing your own transplants. If you grow your own transplants from seeds planted indoors, there are some advantages and disadvantages. One of the best advantages is that you can grow cultivars and varieties which may not be available locally. I showed you that tomato seed packet from Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds. I don't know about the nurseries in your area, but I have never seen seeds from Baker Creek for sale at any commercial big box store or any nursery. So if I want those organic seeds, if I want those organic plants, I have to order online from Baker Creek. Disadvantages to growing your own transplants: you have to worry about transplant shock and possibly hardening them. In order to get good transplants, again, you need good soil, you need plenty of light, you need plenty of moisture, and you need good air circulation. Now, if you want to grow transplants, organically or otherwise, these are just some of the examples of the receptacles you can use to start your transplants off. This is my preferred method down here, the Grow East Seed Starter. This works through capillary action. You have your seed tray at the top here. Seed tray sits on top of a peg stand. Between the peg stand and the seed tray is capillary matting, which soaks up the water in the water reservoir and waters your seedlings from the bottom. This way, instead of watering from the top, you simply fill the reservoir and it gives your plants a nice even water. When you start your seeds, you don't want to use garden soil, because garden soil tends to be hard, blocky, possibly filled with weeds and diseases. You want a good growing media, a good starter mix. Starter mixes are made up of some combination of these items here. And some good organic starting media. These are just some examples here. I like to use the seed starter mix from the Gardener Supply Company. This is an organic version of their seed starter mix. I have been using it for several years now, and it's never disappointed. I've always had good luck. So, but any good organic seed starter, if you want to grow organically, that's what you want to look for. If you do want to get some of your plants in the ground a little earlier than the temperature charts or everything recommend, you can do that as long as you insulate them in some way. These are known as season extending devices. Basically, you put your plants early in the season under or inside one of these devices, and it insulates it from the cold outside. So, for example, a bell cloche, just simply a small greenhouse. You put it over there. Like any greenhouse, the sun's rays penetrate the glass, heat up the ground, and the heat is trapped inside. If you grow in a cold frame, when that heat starts getting a little too hot inside, you could open up the cold frame and vent out some of that heat so that your plants don't fry in the heat. You want to make sure that you water carefully, not too much or too little. If you're starting seedlings indoors, once they start showing what are known as their true leaves, the first leaves that you see when a seedling emerges are what is known as the cotyledonary leaves. These contain the stored food. Once they give that up to the growing plant, the plant will start to produce what are known as the true leaves. These are the leaves that look like what you would expect the leaf to look like in a mature plant. So when plants start showing their true leaves, you want to give them a good starter fertilizer. Starter fertilizers contain the nutrients in a readily available form, because developing seedlings don't yet have the ability to break down stuff in the soil matter to release the nutrients to it. They need nutrients immediately so that they can continue to grow. So you want a good starter fertilizer like one of the ones in the picture here. We talked a little bit about cold frames. If you have a cold frame and you want to provide supplemental heat, then it becomes known as a hotbed. Hardening is simply a physiological process where plants accumulate carbohydrate reserves and produce additional cuticle on the leaves. This allows the plant to withstand such conditions as chilling, drying winds, shortage of water, or high temperatures. The purpose of hardening is to get the plants gradually acclimated to the cooler temperatures outside. If you want to harden transplants, you can do this by placing them outdoors in a protected area and exposing them to lower temperatures for 2 weeks or so before planting. You should bring them indoors or cover them in a cold frame if there's a threat of frost. And you want to expose them to more sunlight, which causes the plant to produce more cuticle, thereby reducing water loss. Now, not everything that you grow is going to be started from seed. Some things are going to be started from plant parts. In a sense, this is like cloning, but not to worry, it's still organic. Vegetative propagation is nothing more than asexual propagation. By asexual, that means there's no fertilization, no pollination, say by a bee or the wind, which causes the pollen of one plant to land on another plant, produce the tube that fertilizes the unites the chromosomes together and creates the seeds. Some advantages and disadvantages: you have genetically identical offspring, so you can preserve advantageous traits. The disadvantage is that if you keep producing from plant parts, they tend to lose vigor because there's no genetic variation. So when we're talking growing from plant parts, what are we referring to here? These are some examples: the crown, the tuber, the bulb, shoots, slips, and roots. And here are some examples in real life, some of the different plant parts. If you want to grow asparagus, for example, if you try to grow it from seed, it will take you 5 years to get a viable crop. On the other hand, if you plant from the crown, which is the part between the stem and the root, it will only take you 3 years. When we talk about germination, I kind of alluded to this earlier, but when you plant a seed, the seed will first start to produce small roots known as radicils. The seed coat will start feeding the developing seedling and will produce more of a root. This small root is known as a hypocotyl. Then it will become a root. At the top, you start getting the stem and the first leaf. You have the cotyledons, the cotyledonary leaves, and eventually you have the true leaves. Let's talk a little bit about vegetative growth. One of the things you want to do when you're growing your garden is you want to strive for that plant to grow as rapidly as possible for several different reasons. One, the plants can better compete against weeds if they're taller and stronger and have a head start than smaller weeds. Also, the bigger they are, the more leaves they have, the more photosynthesis they can do, the more food that they can produce. Keep in mind also that plants will always put reproductive growth over vegetative growth because plants want to continue their species. So when some plants, once the reproductive growth starts, the vegetative growth stops. Now, what this means for you as a gardener is if your plants are still small, you want to force them to grow vegetatively before you allow them to grow reproductively. So an example I always use is the tomato. If you buy a tomato plant and you notice that it's 2 small flowers on it or 2 little tomatoes, and you leave them alone, the plant's going to put what little energy it has in those leaves into those 2 flowers or 2 tomato fruits, and you'll get 2 fruits. Once you pick them, that will be the signal for the plant to start growing vegetatively. But by then, it's September, October, there isn't a whole lot of growing season left. So when you're growing something like a tomato, if the plant is still small and you see it has flowers on it, yank those flowers off. Let the plant get bigger and produce more leaves before you allow it to keep its flowers. I'm going to skip over this section. A little bit about flowering and fruit set. If you're growing fruiting crops, they need to first produce a flower. In order for them to do that, there's 4 things that they need. They need heat, they need moisture, they need fertility, and they need sunlight. Now, if you're growing certain plants like cucurbits, muskmelon, cucumber, squash, etc., they have separate male and female flowers. Yes, my friends, plants do have sex. How can you tell the difference? The female flower has what looks like a mini version of whatever it is you're growing. So this looks like a watermelon. So this is the ovary, which looks like a small watermelon. What happens is that when the pollen from the male flower strikes the stigma of the female flower, when the pollen tube goes down and fertilizes the seeds inside, it also produces a hormonal reaction, which causes the ovary to swell, giving us the vegetables and fruits that we eat today. Fruit set. Fruit set is nothing more than the transformation of a flower into a young fruit. In order to have that happen, in many cases, we need pollinators. And most vegetables and fruits that we grow today are heavily dependent upon insects to pollinate them. And here in this table are many of the vegetables that require that pollen. In order to have pollinators, you have to attract them to your garden. The reason for this is that 1 out of 3 every mouthfuls of food that we consume is dependent upon a pollinator. So if you want to grow organically, instead of trying to spray to get rid of any pests, instead bring in native flowers, native plants to encourage pollinators to come in. Many of these native plants also encourage the predators of some of the insects that prey upon our vegetable crops. So by planting flowers, you can attract them to your garden, which is a natural way to control any pest infestations. Again, these are some of the vegetables that are pollinated by insects. So how do we provide for pollinators? These are just some of the ways. Native wildflowers, larval host plants, providing food and water, shelter. Again, don't spray any pesticides. And lastly, don't be so neat. Yes, we like to clean up at the end of the season or even during the season. But if you clean up too much, you destroy a lot of the potential nesting and hiding places for many of these pollinators. So you want to leave a little brush pile here and maybe an occasional log or stump there so that the pollinators will have some place to have shelter and build a home. Here are some examples of native wildflowers that you can plant to attract pollinators to your garden. Many of the plants that we consider weeds in our garden, like dandelions, are actually valuable food sources for pollinators, especially in the spring. So once again, part of organic gardening is to leave, not to destroy everything that you think is a weed. Leave some of these there present for the pollinators to feed on in the early spring, and then they can come over to your garden and continue to do their work. Also by planting larval host plants. Yes, it's good to plant things for the butterflies and the bees, but you also want to plant things that their larvae will feed on. No larvae, no adults, no butterflies, no moths. It's simple as that. Let's talk a little bit about soil fertility, and plant nutrition. This is the basic composition of soil, which you can see here. There are 3 types of mineral soils to concern yourself with. Sandy soil drains very well. The problem with sandy soil is that it drains a little bit too well. It's hard for it to hold on to water, so most things don't grow very well in sandy soil. Clay soil, on the other hand, retains water very well. The problem is that it retains it a little bit too well. There's very little stuff to separate the mineral particles out. As a result, clay soil tends to get waterlogged, which causes your plants to develop root rot. The ideal soil is what's known as loam soil. It has all the good characteristics of sand and clay with few or any of the downsides. Now, there's a philosophy going around nowadays known as no-till or no-dig gardening. What is this? Well, the key tenet to any no-dig or no-till type of gardening is that the soil needs the plants as much as the plants need the soil. Part of no-dig gardening is always having some kind of plants growing in the soil throughout the season. Once one crop is done, you simply chop it down and dig it out, you chop it down, and without disturbing the soil, plant something else in its place. And you continue that planting rotation all summer long until winter. And at that point, if the plants were healthy, you simply chop the stalks and let them fall. If the pieces are large, chop them up with a hedge trimmer and leave all of that organic matter on top of the soil as mulch. So in other words, with no-dig gardening, you're not turning over the soil like you would with regular tilling. You're simply, again, not disturbing it. In England, a longtime proponent of the no-dig gardening method is a gentleman by the name of Charles Dowding. His method involves creating a raised bed to which he adds compost or a combination of compost and topsoil. And there he just adds plants on top. Another renowned proponent of no-dig gardening, Ruth Stout, used a technique that she dubbed no-work gardening. Her method involves deep mulching by laying 8 to 12 inches of hay or straw over the garden year-round and moving the straw away to plant into the soil. Perhaps the most familiar method of no-dig gardening is what's known as lasagna gardening, so named because of its multiple layers of organic materials. So to employ the lasagna gardening method, you want to layer materials on top of a lawn or even a hard surface. You want to start by putting down about 4 layers of newspaper or cardboard and wet that layer down. On top of that layer, you add some chopped leaves and grass clippings from an untreated lawn or chopped hay. Once you've got several layers of organic materials, cap them all off with a 6-inch layer of compost, and then you plant directly into this mixture. We talked about water. Water is definitely necessary in garden plants, and these are some of the reasons why we need water, what water does for our plants. Yeah, you put water in my vodka bottle. Some people. In order to have successful growth, you need to provide your plants with 1 inch of water per week. Any less than that, and they will not thrive. Also, when you water, you want to take care of the water in the morning, because if you do not, if you tend to water later in the afternoon, then you now have cold, wet plants, which are prime conditions for fungi and mold to develop. And if that happens, you may have to purchase a fungicide or something like that. If you're don't want to use any kind of chemicals whatsoever, these are some of the things that you want to do, which will help you garden organically. And these are just a couple of different ways that you can water. You've often heard that plants will take in carbon dioxide and give off oxygen. Plants also need oxygen for their roots, which is why it's important to make sure that you have good, loose, light soil so that the oxygen can get to the roots. If you grow your vegetables in a greenhouse, after a while, the oxygen tends to build up. You may have to put in a carbon dioxide generator. Once again, you absolutely need to have lots of sunlight in order to get good quality vegetables. If you're starting indoors, your sunny window is never going to be sunny enough because the glass from the window filters out about 90% of the foot candle power of the sun. So you need to make sure that if you're growing indoors, to grow your plants under some kind of a grow light. All right, in your handouts that you'll be receiving, you'll be getting some essential nutrients, a table of essential plant nutrients, what the deficiency and toxicity symptoms are. So use that as a guide. So if you see that your plants are starting to yellow, before you assume it's a disease, check the table. It may be a magnesium deficiency. Carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, you don't have to supply. Plants get that from the atmosphere, from the soil. Nitrogen. Nitrogen has the largest role, more so than any other element, for increasing plant growth. Nitrogen is about 80% of the Earth's atmosphere, but plants cannot use elemental nitrogen. They need to have it in either the nitrate ion or the ammonium ion. And one good way to make sure that your plants get the nitrogen they need organically is to use an organic fertilizer. Or when you prepare your soil in the fall or the early spring, grow what are known as green manure crops. These are crops that are meant to be grown, winter killed, and dug and chopped into the soil. Again, another organic way of taking care of your soil. If you're feeding a lot of manure is very high in nitrogen. If you feed too much nitrogen, if you're trying to grow fruit and crops, you're going to get lots and lots of nice green leaves, but very little in the way of fruit. Another way to add supplemental nitrogen to the soil is to grow what are known as legumes: beans, peas, alfalfa, peanuts. Legumes can do what most green plants cannot. They can take nitrogen from the air, convert it to a form that they can use through the symbiotic relationship of nitrogen-fixing bacteria, which if you were to take a cross-section of one of the lumps on the roots in this picture here and put it under a microscope, you'd see those bacteria. So by planting beans in your garden, for example, you can provide a source of nitrogen so you'll be able to use less fertilizer. Once again, gardening in harmony with nature. Phosphorus is the nutrient that promotes root growth, flower, fruit, and seed development and stimulates stiffer stems. So if you're feeding a lot of nitrogen in the form of manure or commercial fertilizer, you also want to make sure that the plants are getting enough phosphorus. If they're not, you can supply with something like black rock phosphate or a super triple phosphate fertilizer, although be warned, that one is not necessarily organic. If you've ever had this happen with your tomatoes, that's caused by a deficiency of this nutrient, calcium. To garden organically, and you need to supply supplemental calcium, you can use limestone in the soil, but be aware that limestone tends to raise the pH of the soil and make it too alkaline. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip over some of these others. I mentioned earlier about testing your soil. Garden vegetables grow best when the pH of the soil is about slightly acidic to neutral. If you remember your basic high school chemistry, pH stands for potential hydrogen. It measures the acidity or the alkalinity of a substance. These are some typical pH values. So something like household lye is very, very alkaline, whereas something like battery acid is extremely acidic. 7 is considered neutral on a logarithmic scale. And keep in mind that if you're trying to change the pH of your soil, it may take you a year or more to do that, especially if you're growing organically, because if your pH is too alkaline, say it's 8, to go from an 8 to a 7, slightly more acidic, is only a 10-fold decrease. On the other hand, if you're trying to get to a pH of about 6.5, and your garden soil has a pH of 8, that's a 100-fold increase. So it takes some time to adjust your soil pH. A little bit about fertilizer. It's a substance that improves plant growth by providing one or more nutrients. And these are some examples of a fertilizer. I'm going to skip this section. These are some natural deposits which can be used as fertilizer. Again, if you want to garden organically, these are some natural ways that you can add some nutrients to your soil. Be aware that these items provide only a single or maybe 2 nutrients. They are not complete fertilizers. Some examples of some organic fertilizers. Bone meal is a good source of nitrogen, as is blood meal. Cottonseed meal and soybean meal are good sources of nitrogen, but you'll pay a premium for those because you're competing with livestock and poultry producers who use these in their animal foods. Compost, I could do a whole presentation on compost alone, but for the purposes of this one, just be aware that compost is nothing more than decayed organic matter. Bat guano is simply a fat word, another word for bat poop. Kelp meal comes from the sea. While it is organic, be aware that because it came from the sea, it may have a high content of salt. So you want to go easy on this stuff. And sewage sludge, I have one word to say about it. Don't. Because while sewage sludge may contain nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, it may also contain some nasty things like mercury, lead, arsenic, cadmium, and your plants will suck those up just as easily as they will nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So do not use sewage sludge. Soil amendments are things that are applied to the soil to improve their soil texture. may not necessarily provide nutrients like a fertilizer, but improving the condition, the texture of the soil is what these do. And here are some organic ways of doing that. Talk a little bit about mulch. I'm going to skip this section just to say that mulch is any substance that's applied to the soil that keeps plants from temperature extremes or drought, keeps your fruit clean, and suppresses weed growth. And if you're somebody that hates weeding like I do, mulching can reduce your weeding chores by a very great amount. And these are some of the benefits of mulch. These are organic mulching materials that you can use to mulch your gardens. Let's talk now about weed, pest, and disease control. What is a weed? A weed is simply nothing more than a plant out of place. So if a dandelion grows in your vegetable garden, you would consider that a weed. However, what if a rose were to spring up in the middle of your vegetable garden? Would you consider that a weed? Probably not, because we love roses. Well, but by definition, if a rose springs up in the middle of your vegetable garden and you didn't ask for it, you didn't plant it, that makes the rose a weed. It's hard to think of a rose as a weed, so a better definition of a weed would be a plant that's unsightly, like crabgrass in your lawn, causes disease, like ragweed or poison ivy, or grows where it's unwanted. I mentioned earlier that dandelions, we consider them a weed, and the weed control, the lawn service companies would agree with you. But in reality, dandelions are a great way to improve the soil because their long taproot punches through heavy clay soil and breaks it apart. The leaves of dandelions contain more than 4.5 times the vitamin C of citrus fruits. You can use the root to make a coffee substitute and the blossoms to make wine. So part of working in harmony with nature is leaving some of these things alone and not being so quick to pull them. How do we control weeds? Well, as I mentioned earlier, dig them out, pull them out, or use mulch. No herbicide. Insect pests. There are certain species of insects that are very destructive to vegetable plants. Currently, we now have over 1,100 alien insect species in the United States. Many of these were introduced by immigrants when they brought fruit and vegetable plants with them. Now, if you decide to forego the use of insecticides to control the insect pests, and if you want to garden organically, that's what you have to do. But here's how to deal with the insects. You have to first of all expect that you're going to get a certain amount of insect damage. That's just going to be the case. You don't have anything to spray on it. So in order to control the insects, you're going to have to spend more time and effort using mechanical control methods. We're talking picking them off by hand, setting traps, using water jets, etc. One way to deal with the insects is to plant a larger garden than what your needs require. This will give you the necessary yields to offset any losses from insect destruction. And these are just some of the pictures of some of the different bugs that can plague our garden. I don't know how many of you have ever seen one of these big, fat, ugly green worms on your tomato plants. This is a tomato hornworm. This is the larva of the sphinx moth. If you see a tomato hornworm in your garden on your tomatoes with these little white egg cases on it, guess what? You don't have to do a thing because Mother Nature has taken care of it for you. Those eggs are going to hatch into the larva of a parasitic wasp, and the parasitic wasp will eat the tomato hornworm. These are some ways that you can control insect pests. These are also doing some of the same things, can also help control or even eliminate diseases on your vegetable crops. A little bit about disease. Diseases can be a serious problem in the vegetable garden. for these reasons that are there. Thing to remember about disease, you want to work garden organically, remember these three things. In order for a disease infestation to occur, you need to have a susceptible plant, you need the disease organism present, and you need the right conditions for that disease to develop. Take away any one of those stools, any one of those legs, the stool collapses and there's no disease. So one way to control diseases is to make sure that you're planting your plants far enough apart so that there's good air circulation between them. If you do that, you may have a stressed plant. You may have the disease organism present. However, you no longer have the right conditions for that disease to develop. So there's no disease, and you did that organically. Here are some other ways listed here. All right, birds and animals. One second while I find the notes. Animals, most of the animals that inhabit our gardens can be considered friends. You know, they clean up some of the debris, they eat some of the pest insects, but animals are not always our friends. Some animals, like rabbits and squirrels, insist that we share our vegetables with them, even if we don't want to. Now, the animals that are friends, we're talking things like toads, snakes, birds. These are the animals that you should be inviting into your garden by creating friendly habitats for them. But here are some of the animals that can plague our garden. Bears, I'm going to skip over because I don't think anybody in this audience has to deal with bears going after a garden. Birds. Birds will sometimes eat your corn, they'll dig up your seeds. You can control birds organically by hanging up reflectors or fluttering objects around the garden. You can also use aluminum fly screens, plastic bird netting, etc., etc. Deer are highly destructive because not only will they eat your fruiting crops or your hostas or other things like that, they'll stomp all over the remainder of the plants. So you've got double damage. The only way to stop deer is a good, strong fence. Yes, folks, our dogs and our cats can be a problem too. An untrained dog can maul plants or dig up your freshly painted bulbs, flowers, in your lawn. Cats love to lie on freshly turned earth where you just planted your vegetable seeds. And both of these like to use the garden as their place to go potty. Best way to keep them out, a good high fence. Gophers. Gophers will make elaborate tunnels 6 to 18 inches underground. If you want to keep them out of your garden, get a fence 6 to 18 inches high. I'm sorry, get a fence about 6 foot high, sink 2 feet into the ground so they can't tunnel under it. Gophers are particularly tricky because they'll often follow down a person's footsteps. So if you're planting corn or something and you're moving ahead, the gopher is following right behind you, eating what you just planted. In order to discourage this, slightly rake over your footsteps so to cover your tracks. Mice and voles. They're similar in appearance. They're both small, brown, and furry, but the mice have bigger ears. Voles, also known as field mice, are an outdoor pest. Moles. Moles will make mounds of dirt from their main tunnel and ridges or raised in cracked soil just above their shallow feeding tunnels. Moles are a pest because their tunnels will not only disturb the roots of some of your plants, but they will also eat the roots of your tomatoes. You can get rid of moles by inserting children's pinwheels into their tunnels. The vibrations will scare them away. Also, if you control the grubs on your lawn, if you get rid of the grubs, there's nothing for the moles to eat and they'll have to move on. Opossums. Opossums normally we should welcome into our garden because they eat grubs and roadkill. However, occasionally they will also partake of fruits and vegetables, especially tomatoes and corn. You want to discourage them? Put away any pet food bowls, put away any bird feeders. Don't feed any outdoor cats, or if you do, make sure to put what food is left over into a sealed bin in your shed so they can't get to it. Rabbits will eat your flower and vegetable seedlings. You can stop them with a 2-foot high fence made of 1.5 inch thick galvanized wire. You can also, if you want to do this organically, spread things like dried blood, mothballs, blood meals, predator urine. Those things will scare them off. Raccoons are a serious pest of sweet corn. If you're growing sweet corn, they know just about 2 days before they're ready to harvest when to steal them from you. To stop them, you can cover the ears with paper bags, or you can plant gourds, pumpkins, or squash among the corn plants. The spiny vines will hurt their delicate little paws. Squirrels will usually take a bite or two of your large tomatoes and then steal the smaller ones. They're very difficult to control because those little buggers are smart. Some ways to consider controlling them is to use predator urine, hot pepper wax solutions, vinegar-soaked rags, coffee grounds, dog hair, mothballs, etc., etc. Woodchucks or groundhogs are found mostly in the Northeast and the Midwest. Their burrows go deep into the ground, can also disturb the root systems of your vegetable crops. They tend to eat clover, alfalfa, peas, beans, cole crops, and lettuce. So if you don't want them feeding on anything in your house like that, I would try to control the woodchucks. Now, you can apply repellents like dried blood, predator urine, talcum powder, etc. If all else fails, I hear them's good eating. All right. That is organic power gardening in a nutshell. Before we go on to questions, here's my contact information. If you don't get your question answered tonight, feel free to call me or email me or like me on Facebook. Check out Google and my blog. Check out Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. You can link up with me on the latter. So with that, I will take questions.
You had a very thorough program, Mark. We don't have too many questions. There was one in the chat. How exactly can I use dish soap to clean a diseased plant? Or is that a myth? And does trying to grow an organic garden matter?
The question is, can I use dish soap, or how can I use dish soap in an organic garden? Dish soap can be used in combination, or dish soap or any other soap insecticide. They're mainly used for chewing and sucking insects, which have pores in their bodies which they breathe through. Using this, you cover up those pores, like aphids, for example, and you essentially suffocate them. This doesn't work too well on beetles because they have that hard exoskeleton. So, and there are commercial soap type insecticides that you can buy, which are all natural. So I recommend one of those instead of just using straight Dawn dishwashing liquid or something like that. That was a long-winded answer, but I hope I answered your question.
Okay, we have another question. I keep having something pull up my grapes, watermelon, and pumpkin plants. How can I stop it?
Something is pulling up your grape, watermelon, and what else was that again?
Pumpkins.
Pumpkin plants. How can you stop it? Before you stop it, you got to first know what it is. So you might want to set up a camera of some kind, a motion sensitive camera or whatever that can take pictures if you think this thing is coming out at night, or even during the daytime. You can set that up and see just what might be plaguing your garden. Once you know, you can take the appropriate measures. Again, a good high fence will keep out probably most everything. You want to, again, sink that several inches below ground to keep them from tunneling under. If you don't know and you're not sure you want to know, and you just want to keep them out right away, I would go with the fence. Otherwise, you can, again, without knowing, you can use things like hot pepper wax, which is a liquid capsaicin solution. Any critter that bites into anything that you've treated it with would be like you biting into a Carolina Reaper pepper, or even worse. The hottest one now on the market now is Pepper X. So Eventually, the animals, if they get tired of getting their tongues burned, will flee from your garden. Oh, I hope that answered your question.
All right, one question here. Are coffee grounds a good thing for plants?
Are coffee grounds a good things for plants? Yes, as long as you decompose them first. Because if you put straight coffee grounds in your garden with growing plants, the bacteria that break up those coffee grounds, they need their own source of nitrogen so that they can be healthy enough to do that. If they don't have some form of nitrogen, they're going to steal it from your soil and your plants. So they're going to take nitrogen before they break those coffee grounds down to release nitrogen. So before you put it in the garden, put it in your compost pile. Or if you're going to put it directly in the garden, do so in the fall so that you have all winter long for the bacteria to break down that stuff and release the nutrients.
Good. Um, Here's one. My tomato plants grow tall, but do not fruit. My mother's swears by Miracle Grow, and I hate to admit it, but her tomato plants are bountiful. What should I do?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't use Miracle Grow no matter what your mother says. Miracle Grow is a chemical fertilizer, and if you want to garden organically, Miracle Grow does not qualify. The problem with feeding things like Miracle Grow is that you turn your garden soil into a drug addict because those concentrated nutrients kill off the web of life in your soil. So you have to keep feeding that stuff in order to get fertile soil. Sure, your mother may be having a bountiful harvest of tomatoes, but at what cost? She has to keep feeding Miracle Grow, and that stuff eventually leaches out of the soil into our groundwater, pollutes our lakes and streams, causes algae bloom, so things like that. So for you, I recommend a good organic fertilizer in your soil. Um, I like either the Dr. Earth brand or one of the Espoma brand fertilizers, ESPOMA. Espoma makes a lot of different fertilizer formulations, all ending in the word tone. There's a tomato tone, there's holly tone, there's garden tone, there's fruit tone, all different formulations for different plants. What else do I want to say on this? Yes, if you feed the soil with a good organic fertilizer, also in the fall, you might want to consider working in some organic matter, compost, earthworm castings, manure, things like that. Work all that into the soil. And then after that, you'll have 3 months of winter for all that stuff to decompose, release nutrients to the soil. And by the time spring comes around, you'll have natural, fertile soil that you can work with. You can also plant one of those green manure crops in the late fall or early spring. When they die off in the following spring, you just simply use your rototiller. You dig and chop and you work those into the soil. You should now have much more fertile soil than what you had before, all without chemical fertilizers like Miracle Grow. Once again, a long-winded answer, but did I answer your question?
I think so. That's all the
Good
questions we have,
questions?
Mark.
Okay, then if there are no more questions, I will leave you with this. When the gardener comes around and he's digging in the ground, the gardener grows it all. If you'll only look and see, I think you will agree, the gardener is the one who grows it all. The gardener is the one, the gardener is the one, grows tomatoes through the fall. And they're tasty and they're sweet, and you know they can't be beat. The gardener is the one who grows it all. The gardener is the one, the gardener is the one, grows zucchini through the fall. And is happy just to share with his friends and neighbors there, because his family simply cannot use it all. Yes, the gardener is the one who grows it all. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for joining me for this presentation today. I hope I gave everyone some good, useful information. And I encourage you to go home and if you want to garden, try gardening organically. Mother Nature will thank you for it.
Great. Thank you all so much.
Have a good evening, everyone.